Hello and welcome to this lecture, and in this lecture we are going to learn something about firebase authentication. So in the previous lecture what we have done is that we have learned about how to get values from firebase and display them in a list view. So in this lecture we will learn how to authenticate a user, that is how to check if the user is already registered with us, and only when the user is registered with a proper email address or user ID and password, only then he should be able to access our application. So if you talk about authentication, so before Firebase, the process of designing the authentication was quite complex and quite time consuming. But with Firebase, if you open up Firebase right here, as you could see, there is a separate tab which is called as the authentication. So as you could see right now, we don't have any user over here. So what you could simply do is that if you go to the sign in method, as you could see, Firebase provides these multiple types of authentication. So in the first part, you have the email and password authentication, wherein you could authenticate users depending upon their individual email and password fields. The next thing is the Google authentication. So if your user has Google account, he could use his Google account to log in into your app and use it. And we also have the Facebook authentication, Twitter authentication, GitHub, and another one which is the anonymous. So what these special type of authentications allow you to do is that provides your users with a special features wherein they don't have to specifically register for your app. So for the sake of this tutorial, we will only go through the email/password authentication, and we will learn how to authenticate users when they have the correct email and password. So this is going to be a multi-part tutorial, wherein first we will have the designing part, wherein we will design the authentication form, wherein we will have two text fields. One is going to be for email and the next one is going to be for password. Then the next thing which we do is that we will write in the authentication code, that is how to authenticate users. Then we will enable the authentication from the Firebase app. And then we will set the authentication from the Firebase console, and finally we will design a success activity, and on that success activity we are going to have a logout button. So you also need to learn how to basically log out a user once the authentication is done, so that the user is not always logged in into your app. So without wasting any time, let's go ahead and learn how to perform authentication. So the first thing which we will do is that we will enable the authentication. So simply click over here and click on enable, hit save, and we are good to go. So as you could see, now the email/password authentication is enabled. And now if you go to users, as you could see right now, we don't have any user over here. So let me just go ahead and add the user. So let's type in some fake email ID. So let's say abc@xyz.com, and let's set the password as admin123. So we are actually adding the user or signing up the user manually, but we are also going to learn how to sign them up actually. But for the sake of this example, let's set it up this way. So you simply need to hit add user and make sure to remember the password and email. So when we click add user, as you could see, now the user has been added over here. So now the next thing which we do is that we will design a simple layout. So let me just go into the XML code and let me just replace everything with an edit text. That's going to be match parent, wrap content, and let's say the hint over here is enter email ID, and let's say the ID of this is going to be @ID user email, and let's create another text view which looks similar to this. So let me just copy this edit text and paste it right below it. So this is going to be the same thing. Instead of enter email address, we'll type in enter password, and here we will have the ID as user pass, which stands for user password. And once this thing is done, we are good to go. Now let's simply add up a button over here. So let me just type in button. That's going to be match parent and wrap content. The ID is going to be @ID, and okay, so you don't actually need to set an ID for the button, but you do need to have an on click. So the on click is going to be, let's say, login, and let's say the text on the button is going to be login as well. So let's say instead of login, let's say we will type in login, button clicked. Okay, so once this thing is done, we are good to go. So now the next thing which we need to do is that we need to write the main logic inside the Java code. So here what we do is that we hop onto the Java code, and as you could see, we have a bunch of code from the previous lecture as well. So let me just go ahead and delete that real quick. Okay, so once this thing is deleted, I'll make sure that we don't have any code from the previous lecture. Okay, so as you could see, right now we don't have anything over here. We just have the onCreate method. So the first thing which you need to do here is that you do need to get a reference to the Firebase database. So let me just quickly go ahead and add a reference. So we will type in Firebase database and database reference, and after this we will type in database reference myref. And now once this thing is done, what you need to do is that you need to go to tools, go to Firebase, and here what you need to do is that you do need to set a dependency for authentication as well. So if you go to authentication, if you click on email and password, as you could see, there is an option which says add Firebase authentication to your app. So you simply need to click that, click on accept changes, and that's going to add in the dependencies which are required for authentication. So it's actually going to take a while, but the dependencies are going to be added, and we could basically go ahead and set up the Firebase auth, and we will also set up the auth state listener. So the Firebase auth is actually a reference to the Firebase authentication. Just as we had a reference to the database, this is a reference to the authentication. And we have actually declared these things because let's assume that you want to use or you want to have a reference to the database if you want to display some database values. So let's see if we actually need them, but for now what we will do is that we will use the Firebase auth. So that's going to be private Firebase auth. Let's type in mauth, and also private, that's going to be Firebase auth dot auth state listener. So what this auth state listener actually does is that it basically determines what is the current authentication state of the user. That is, it constantly makes a check if the user is authenticated, and only if the user is authenticated he will be able to access our application or our application data. So once this thing is done, let's go ahead and get a reference to the edit text as well. So let's first declare them over here. So that's going to be private edit text email text for email, and private edit text pass text for password. So let's basically go ahead and get a reference to them over here. So the email text is going to be typecasted to edit text, find view by id r.id dot user pass, and for the password text we type in pass text equals, that's going to be edit text, find view by id r.id dot, that's going to be user pass, and actually this should be email instead of pass. So if you switch over here, as you could see, the id assigned to this is user pass and this is user email. So let me just quickly make the changes over here, and sorry for that, I actually got confused between values and their names. Okay, so once this thing is done, what we do is that as we get a reference to the Firebase instance, we also need to get a reference to the mauth as well. So we'll type in mauth equals Firebase auth dot get instance. So once we get this instance, what we do is that we use the auth state listener. So that's going to be auth state listener equals new Firebase auth dot auth state listener, and if you do that, as you could see, it shows you some error. So if you hover over it, it says implement methods. So click on that, and you do need to implement the on auth state changed method. So when you click that, as you could see, now you have this method right over here. So after that, make sure to have a semicolon over here, and in this what we do is that we basically start a new activity. So here what we want to do is that we want to write in the code which allows you to start a new activity once you are logged in. But even before doing that, what you need to do is that you do need to check if the user is authenticated. So here what we want to do is that we want to add the code which basically gets executed when the user enters his credentials and clicks this login button. So what we will do is that we'll write this code in the next lecture. So thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you guys next time. Thank you.